It's been a while since I've tested a Google phone, but I always like the way that they design their cameras. Today, I've got the Pixel 7 Pro. I'm gonna see how it performs next to the iPhone 14 Pro, just in some general shooting environments. How has it advanced over the years? And especially, how does it perform now that the hardware is catching up with Google's amazing imaging software? In case you're not subscribed, I should let you know up front that iOS is my preferred operating system, so most of the time I'm using an iPhone. But I love playing with Androids because there's just so much more experimentation in terms of hardware. And actually, it's been really interesting lately because more and more clients have been asking for mobile, TikTok-looking photos and videos in the commercial work that we create for them. So we've been using the iPhone 14 for client work. So I want to see, how does the Pixel stack up? If we just look at the specs, there's a lot of similarities between the Pixel and the iPhone. We got 48 megapixels versus 50. So let's start by looking at some of the bigger differences. First of all, zoom lens. This has a real 5x zoom built into the Pixel 7 Pro. On the iPhone 14 Pro, it's a maximum of 3x zoom. This is actually really substantial if your priority is just seeing a very long way. And actually, this morning I had a perfect opportunity to show this off. The moon was really bright as the sun was rising. And check out the difference between the Pixel and the iPhone here. It made a real difference. With the iPhone, you can't really even tell what's going on. It's too far away to tell that it's the moon, whereas on the Pixel, you can tell. And especially when you zoom in to 10 times. So this is cropping the 5x lens. So you're still getting like a real optical zoom, sort of, but you're just cropping in. But you know what, for Instagram, this looks pretty impressive, and I just wasn't able to do it on the iPhone. Here's another example to show you what 10x zoom looks like. So here's the ultra wide, and then this is the main camera, cropped into X on that main camera, which, let's quickly observe the quality, because this is cropping into a 50 megapixel sensor, so it's sort of a real zoom, but not really. It looks pretty good on a mobile screen. If you're watching this video on your iPhone, it probably looks great. Looking at it on a full display, you can see more of the artifacting, and it is clearly different than real optical zoom, not quite as good. Now we punch into 5x, let's take a look at this quality as well. Overall, I'd say it's not looking great. The detail is pretty smeary. It's not nearly as nice as on that full main lens. I'm actually pretty disappointed at this. I thought it was gonna be a bit better. And then this is what it looks like when Google crops into 10x. So they say it's doing all sorts of intelligent things to make this crop look as good as it can. And you know what? It actually looks pretty decent considering the other one looked bad. It looks better than when I just zoom into the 5x crop. I actually don't understand this. 5x, 10x. Why does the 5x look worse? The way I would think about any of these really long zoom lenses on any of the mobile phones is that they're more about just establishing like what is out there. Like it's a set of binoculars, but it's not as aesthetically pleasing as any of the main lenses. Just to double check I'm not crazy, here's 5x zoom on the left, 10x on the right. If we take a closer look at both of them, Google is doing a better job of upsizing that 10x than just zooming into the 5x. Not at all what I expected. Whatever creative project you're working on, it's hard to make everything from scratch. So it's really helpful to have a subscription to a library of stock photos, video templates, graphic templates, 3D objects, music. All of these are really important, but it's so expensive to have multiple subscriptions for all of those services. Envato Elements brings it all together into one low-price subscription so you can get everything you need in one place. They have so many different kinds of resources available, literally millions of elements. You can find After Effects templates, stock footage, logo templates, Photoshop actions, even Apple Motion templates, which are sometimes hard to come by, and I've really started to appreciate how powerful Apple Motion is in Final Cut Pro. And once your creative project's done, you want to show it off. They've got website templates, email templates, fonts, everything to package up whatever it is you created to make it look completely professional. One thing you don't want to worry about, but you have to pay attention to, is licensing, because often when you download something that says it's free on the internet, it's only free for personal use. You can't necessarily use it in whatever other project you're working on. With Envato Elements, you never have to worry about licensing. It's good for commercial use, whatever it is you need, and you don't have to worry about potentially getting in trouble because it's already cleared. So even when your subscription ends, you're still cleared for anything you made while it was active. As independent photographers and filmmakers, we're always looking ways to up our production value, and we don't always necessarily have a bigger budget to go along with that. So with Envato, it's like having a whole team to support you. You can use work from some of the best creatives in the world, all for one low subscription price. So to find out more and give Envato a try, hit the link in the description below. One thing I could see right away shooting outside is that the iPhone's screen was brighter, like visibly brighter. Now the specs are pretty similar. They both have 1000 nits of max brightness and 1500, 1600 peak nits of brightness, but outdoors, the iPhone can go up to 2000. Now, I've been curious, like when is it deciding to do this? I guess it's doing it right now because it is much brighter. I wish Apple was a little more transparent about when those differences were happening, but it looks great and is a very useful feature when you're shooting outside. The main camera on the Pixel 7 is very similar or exactly the same as the Pixel 6. And now that the iPhone 14 Pro has a 48 megapixel sensor, they're a lot closer to compare. In all the samples we shot, there's two differences that really separate these cameras. And they're both related. You can see in the dark areas of the house, it's lifting them up. It's a bit more of an HDR effect. Compared to the iPhone, lets the blacks be black. And just for reference, those black areas are actually black, even though they look kind of brown in this Pixel photo. In this photo, you can see it in the highlights. The Pixel is holding on to some of the cloud detail while the iPhone is letting it clip. And in this comparison, I actually really do prefer the Pixel. I think it has a nicer, softer look. The histogram in Lightroom is telling the whole story. So the Pixel photo is more towards the middle. It's a softer contrast. And with the iPhone, it's pushing the white point and the black point further towards the edges to kind of fill the whole spectrum. I'm just gonna flake back and forth here. Think about it, take a close look, and tell me what you think in the comments. Do you prefer the iPhone 14 or the Pixel 7 Pro? Once I zoom in, actually it's kind of strange. It looks like the Pixel is sort of out of focus, which both of these are at infinite distance. They shouldn't have needed to be out of focus. So let's look at some more samples. You can see each camera made a different choice in terms of the yellows in this photo. And if we zoom in, the detail looks very similar to me. I don't think there's an important difference here. This example really shows the potential worst case of the Pixel. It's decided to push the shadows in a very HDR direction, farther than the sensor can possibly handle. Zooming in, there's all sorts of color noise and it's muddy, and they just didn't need to try to lift these shadows up, whereas the iPhone is really holding on to a nicer set of detail here. Letting the shadows be a little deeper, maybe doing better noise removal. I don't really know why it's so much better, but I massively prefer the iPhone. It's just more reliable in this case, not making strange decisions that I'm sure the Pixel's sensor could have avoided. Looking at portrait mode, you can see we're getting some very different results here. These are both taken from the exact same spot. And if we zoom in, I can say I was expecting better. This should be a really easy photo to cut out. There's no hair, there's no weird edges, but it still made some mistakes around the hat. As an iPhone user, there's a few things that really drive me crazy about it. Biggest thing is that there's no preview, and this might sound small as an Android user that's used to it, like, oh, why do you need to see it? It's gonna process it afterwards. But when you're used to seeing the image that you're about to take before you take, do you remember when VHS cameras recorded in black and white? You couldn't see color through the viewfinder. You wanna see the image that you're taking, so it does feel like a step back not to have it. Then after I take portrait mode photos, I have to wait a little while for the phone to process it. Whereas on the iPhone, it's ready instantly. Another big thing, I didn't know this was the case, but it actually doesn't get nearly as wide. Even though it's using the similar wide angle lens, I'm much closer when I shoot with the Pixel than I am with the iPhone 14 Pro. In this photo of John, the camera is completely cropped out in the Pixel, whereas I can see it clearly in the iPhone. And then if I want to zoom in, the Pixel is over sharpened and it doesn't use the 5x lens, it only uses the 1x lens. Whereas on the iPhone, I can also take a 3x portrait mode photo, which also looks great. This 2x photo actually looks terrible. Especially when you zoom in. On the Pixel, it's just way over sharpened. They're trying to do more than they can really handle. And honestly, it should just stay at 1x because this is a pretty bad example. And the iPhone's also doing a better job of cutting him out. If we look at the top of his hat, there's more artifacts on the Pixel. This is definitely a win for the iPhone. During the Pixel 7 keynote, there was this funny battle back and forth of who innovated on what between Google and Apple. And this is one of the features that Google is catching up on. They've added cinematic mode, but right now it's only in HD, whereas the iPhone 14 Pro can now shoot cinematic mode in 4K. If you're finding that it's not cutting things out correctly and it's kind of fuzzy around the edges, the best trick to make it better is to turn down the blur. Okay, so I said that and then I tried to change the blurriness on the Pixel. You can't make it less blurry. On the iPhone, you can turn the f-stop to a higher number, which makes the background less blurry and makes the artifacts kind of go away. Pixel doesn't have that. Okay, when I back up, I just gotta say the Pixel looks so fake. It's still blurring you as much when I'm across the parking lot versus when I get close to you. So this is not how a real lens behaves. Like on that lens, you can see as I get further, I become a similar level of focus to the background. Everything's kind of in focus more or less. As I come closer, the background gets blurrier, I become sharper. Notice how that is not happening here and it looks so fake. Now that I'm back in the studio looking at these samples, cinematic mode looks terrible on the Pixel. I'm sorry, Google. it just didn't really work out. There's a lot of artifacting around the edges, and check out this shot when I was just kind of running around John. I wasn't trying to make it look bad, but it looks crazy. It's like completely broken. Up until now, I'd been complaining about some of the details in iPhone cinematic mode, but looking at it next to the Pixel, it looks so much better. I mean, it's much more refined this year as well. It can also blur objects in the foreground like a real lens does. It looks much more realistic, way more refined. So the selfie camera, always the most underrated camera because people use it a lot, especially content creators, any TikTokers out there, you know what I mean? Like the only way to record yourself so you can see yourself is with the selfie camera. So the fact that they bumped it up to 11 megapixels is fantastic. Now, at the same time, Apple has also updated their selfie camera, so both of them are looking better. In some of my first tests, I found they were both reading some very different white balances, which was really interesting. One thing I really like on Google's interface is that the camera app actually allows for manual white balance overriding, which is incredibly useful. I've been saying that Apple really needs to add this into the default camera app because often it's the one thing that I need to switch over to third-party camera apps for. White balance is not a solved problem yet. The Pixel 7 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro both feature 0.5 ultra-wide lenses. I love shooting with these lenses. This photo is another example where I prefer the softer, less contrasty look of the Pixel, but you tell me if you think differently. Zooming in, the center sharpness is very similar. But zooming into the corners, the iPhone looks a little bit sharper, a little less noise removal going on. They both look really good. I'm not seeing a huge difference here. The Pixel's photo pipeline is full of software tricks that Google says are enabled by its Tensor G2 processor, but it seems like those features end up coming to other Pixel phones eventually, like Magic Eraser, or now there's the Unblur tool. I think it's great for Google to offer those tools built into their phone, but as a photographer, it's not all that different from other tools we've seen before. Like on my iPhone, I've got the Retouch app, which is also available for Android, and Photoshop has done Unblur before. So it's making these things accessible to more people, but I don't know, didn't pay that much attention to them. There's more than just the technical results of the photo, there's also the usability, and there's a lot of things that I think the Pixel 7 camera app is doing really well. For example, having a level visible as soon as you launch the app. On the iPhone, if you want to change camera settings or enable or disable certain features, you have to dig deep into the settings menu. But on the Pixel, it's just accessible. It's like right there from the app, you can start changing whatever you want. Apple's gonna have to do some design work to keep their interface competitive. The Pixel team has done a lot of work on their video quality and in controlled environments like this. It looks pretty great. But when we were out on the street, there's certain times that it looked terrible. You can see as the dynamic range is shifting here, it is getting destroyed by the iPhone. The iPhone's just much more predictable and reliable. Both phones use their ultra-wide lens for macro mode, and honestly, macro is like one of the reasons to upgrade your phone because it is so much fun, it's really addictive. At first glance, they look pretty similar, but if we want a pixel peep, the iPhone is visibly sharper, it holds on to more detail, and also found the iPhone's autofocus to be a little faster and more accurate in finding a macro subject. So what do I think of the Pixel 7 Pro? It is an extremely capable, competent, and impressive camera on a cell phone. I would still choose the iPhone because of its reliability. It's a little bit more predictable in each image. You know how it's going to treat the scene. But you know what? If you like using Android, the value of the Pixel 7 Pro at $899 is really hard to beat. The iPhone Pro starts at $100 more, or if you want to match the screen sizes, you have to pay $200 more for the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which is $1,099 US. So you could save $200 by choosing the Pro Pixel, or the Pixel 7 is only $599. All of these cameras are amazing now, and I'm just splitting hairs looking at the differences. But if you like to split hairs as much as I do, you should check out my iPhone 14 versus 14 Pro video, where I go very in-depth on the subtle differences between Apple's latest phones. I'll see you over there in that video.